can't or need some assistance, we've got the city attorney and other staffers standing by. First, you wanted to know the amount of the municipal bonds that will be issued, who's going to be the issuer, and so on and so forth. So you want to explain the timing and
Yeah, the process with the TADs is the city has already created 4 TADs, and you're considering creating 2 additional ones. At this point, there are no projects to be financed. To my knowledge, there has not been any underwriters designated. That typically happens when projects in the TADs come forward and seek financing. And they basically have 3 alternative ways they can be financed. They can do municipal bonds, that's probably the traditional way, tax-exempt debt, and that debt would be a revenue bond. It's not a pledge of the full faith and credit of the consolidated government. It's only secured by the project itself, by the revenues that the project generates, its property taxes. And so typically in the process, what would happen now that you've created TADs, projects would come forward and seek TAD funding from the city. If you agreed that those were qualified projects and that they were eligible for funding, at that point you would go out and seek an underwriter to do that financing. And typically they are done project by project, not grouped together. The city of Atlanta has done some of that grouping together, but that's pretty unusual. Most of the cities do, each project does its own financing. And I would expect, given the size of the kind of projects you'd see here, that would be probably the process. And the 3 ways you can finance them would be through tax-exempt debt, or through a bank loan that's secured by those payments, or you can do what's called pay-as-you-go, which is you basically rebate back that amount of tax increment over some time period to the developer, say for 10 years or 12 years. All 3 of those techniques are used in Georgia. There's examples everywhere in terms of using those various funding techniques, but all those decisions will get made by council at a future date when projects come forward to you for approval. That's not, all we're doing here is setting up the mechanism. We're not approving any projects for financing, or you're not approving any projects for financing.
let's see. Now I can't read my own writing.
The question about aggregation.
Is it an assessment or a revenue bond?
It's a revenue bond. So unlike a sewer bond or other things where you're pledging the full faith and credit of the government, in this case, the bond is secured only by the increment that's generated in each of the TAD funds. So let's say in TAD District number 1, you had a project, you went out and financed that project, and there was, say, a $5 million bond issued. The only recourse the bond buyer has is to that TAD fund, not back to the city, to your general fund. It's a revenue bond, which is like you would have an industrial revenue bond or other revenue bonds that the city would issue. The other thing is you cannot in Georgia commingle the TADs, so we can't have financing that takes TAD 1, 2, 3, and 5 and puts them together and mingles the money. In Georgia, all TADs have to stand on their own, so you have to have a separate financing. In other states, they do allow that. They do allow you to combine them, but in Georgia, we don't. So each district, if you think about it, it's like its own little financing district, and you can't take money from 2 and give it to 3 or 1 to 5, or it has to be just within that district.
Okay, I think that's got it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ken. We've got
Thanks.
a couple of, we've got Counselor, hold on a second, Counselor Thomas.
Mr. Bleakly,
Yes.
typically, the groups that bring TADs to be approved, and what we're doing tonight, TAD districts, that's not the city that's doing that. That's, for instance, this one is the Midtown organization.
Yes.
One was the Uptown organization. One
Yes.
was the Liberty District organization. It's not something that the city itself puts out there, and those entities draw the lines. Is that?
Well, yes, they make application to you. You have the right to redraw those lines. You don't have to accept they're making a recommendation to you as council, and you have authority to, your authority is to approve it as it is, decline it as it is, or amend the boundary. You totally have, it's up to you to set the boundary. They're just suggesting that as a potential boundary.
I guess my point is, from what Mr. Olson said, the city is not proposing
That's-
the TADs.
That's correct.
Some organization is proposing it to us.
Yes, and what they're seeking is your support. Only you have the authority to create TAD districts, so they have come to you requesting that you would form a district, but they are the initiators. They're initiating the idea, that's correct.
And if the funding system is the revenue bond, I want to make
Yeah.
real clear that the city is not on the tab for repayment of that revenue bond. It comes from the proceeds or from the
Yes.
project itself.
Yeah, the city would issue the bond, but the money you would use to pay it back would only be from that TAD fund, not your other revenues. So when you pledge, when the person buys that bond, they know their only recourse is to the money that's in that account.
And if someone comes to us with a project, they have to meet all of the local requirements for construction
Oh, yeah.
and all of those kinds of things. That piece of it does not change.
No
at all.
zoning, approvals, all those processes stay exactly the same. There's
All
no
of
change.
which the city at some point controls.
That's correct,
Thank you.
yes.
All right, we have Counselor Davis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Bleakly, I did want to say thank you for this handout. I did make a comment last week, although in general about when we start setting these boundaries that we need to be very cognizant of, let's just say, corporate benefactors that really contribute to our local economy and the operations of the government. I think I made that comment. This helps me a little bit better because I thought there was one or two major corporate benefactors that was part of it, and I did have a question from that standpoint, but they're not. So I'm okay with that. The other thing you talked about earlier, you were mentioning the financing aspect about the bonds. I think the way I have understood it and what we've talked about at this table, much of the time is that the city could be a benefactor of infrastructure improvements and doing things like that. But what I just heard you say was totally different, that actually there may be a request for financing of a project that would exclude any infrastructure needs.
It could be, sure, somebody could come
Right.
forward and make a proposal,
I
absolutely.
know that's an option, but you didn't
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah, no, and the city can make its own proposal.
Right.
Under the way the law works, we just did a deal in Gainesville where the city was putting in a bike trail connection.
Right.
They put in matching funds from their TAD. They'd already gotten most of the money from other, I think it was a state grant and a federal grant. The city requested that they take, I think it was 700,000 out of their account, and they use that as matching funds. So, yes.
Well, and that, you do need, the key here is having major projects that are going
Yeah.
to support these TADs or any type of bond financing, but you can either do one or the other. I guess that's my point. Either the city's going to do infrastructure or you're going to use it in another way. So, I just want to be clear on that because what you just talked about was strictly a project financing versus a city need or an infrastructure improvement. Is that?
Yeah, or it could, like, a typical thing would be a parking deck or something like that,
Right,
which
right.
might be infrastructure,
Right.
but it really helps the project happen as well as part of
Right,
that.
but if
so.
you earmark it and use it somewhere else. the
No, then you
chances of doing
can't.
that, you
And the other thing that's really key is you have to create value or you don't have the increment.
Correct.
We have had cases where cities have tried to do parks, but there's no adjacent development, then you don't have any increment to
Correct.
put in the park, so,
Thank you, sir.
yes.
Okay. We have Counselor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to restate that, my concern's always been is accurate a tax digest valuation as we can get. And we were told, I just want to restate it, I do it every time, I know you're getting tired of hearing me hearing it. But I just want to restate for the record that we will, within the next several weeks, be amending all of these boundaries in order to reset the valuation date for, I guess, the 1st of January, is that correct? Because I was under the impression we were going to have, or be very, very close to a complete and accurate digest based on up-to-date assessments on January 1. which would make sure, from a taxpayer's perspective, it's not a lot of money in the scheme of things, but we owe it to the people paying the taxes, I think, to make sure we have an accurate baseline. So just as a reminder, I guess these won't set the tax basis until January 1 anyway, right?
Yeah, December 31, yeah,
December 31.
the end of this year.
Right.
So you'll have, when the
So
letter
we don't
goes.
have to amend these. right?
Probably not. I would guess not. I mean, if there's changes, you may want to amend
Because
it,
the
but you're going to be
valuation- I just want to make sure.
really close to that
So the
value.
valuation would not, it should be done by the end of the year anyway, which is going to be the date when we assess the value, or take the value that's on the books.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
As I understand it, it will be effective or go live January of 2017. And so what we need to do, I think you've done it with the others, whether it was an amendment to allow for inclusion of the new digest before it's determined the value of the digest for that specific TAD. And so we certainly want to do it with these two. But as I understand it, it's January of 2017, so I don't know if you're saying December 31st, we don't want to get caught up in a day or two, so it's something that we need to verify.
Yeah, we need to verify, because otherwise, then I guess what we'd have to do if we wanted to be accurate would be to amend it on January 1st of 17 so that it would re-trigger the valuation effective that year.
Yes.
My guess,
But then the challenge there is anybody that want to bring a project during 17 couldn't do it because the valuation wouldn't have been established. Or could they?
yeah, I mean, my guess is the numbers are going to be so modest
Well, and
that
listen,
they would
and-
be able to go out and say, hey, the difference is 2%. And so we can, in terms of the project, be able to say, okay, we can totally adjust that 2%
Okay.
and go forward. I think where we're going to end up is when we send the letter to certify the digest at the end of December, we're going to be really close to that number, I would guess.
And listen,
Yeah.
if it was my money,
Yeah.
really close is really good.
Yeah.
But it's not my money.
No, I'm saying we'll be a lot closer than we'd be now, because we'll have the appeals, we'll be a
Well,
lot closer.
I just
to
want to
that.
remind people
Yeah.
that there's still an opportunity
Absolutely.
to take action that will allow us to get as close as humanly possible
Correct.
to an accurate assessment of our properties within the boundaries.
And if that's done before December 31, for some reason on a parcel, that's fine. You can amend the TAD before then, but the TAD is created on December 31 of this year, and if you amend it, then it'll be December 31 next year.
That's
But-
right.
But I guess I just don't want us to get caught up in missing it by a short window.
I understand
And
completely.
so if it can be understood in your approval that it's for the new valuations or digest,
I think
that would be helpful for us.
I think we can do that, and if it's legal to do that kind of administratively, to make sure that the valuation is as what it is after our updated assessments in 17, I'm fine. Otherwise, we do have a mechanism. We just amend the boundary again, and it resets
Yeah.
the amount.
And I think other proponents or those who've come forward with TADs have agreed to that.
Yes,
And
they have.
certainly they can agree to
Right.
the same thing.
And I know we've said this every public hearing we've had ad nauseum, but I just want to make sure that people remember it when we have to address it. Thanks.
All right, and we have the Mayor Pro Tem.
And what happens if we don't have the new values, December 31st? I know the tax assessor's office said we should have.
And I'm saying, Mayor Pro Tem, the information that I have at this point is that it will be 2017, and so we know that when the tax notices go out for 17, in August of 17 or whenever, it's going to reflect the new valuations, the new digest. And so that's why I hate to put a date on it, but if we could say that the valuations for 2017 would be effective with these two TADs. It would be
No,
helpful.
you can't, it's set as of December 31 of this year. If you need to amend it next year, you can, and it will be set at the end of
31 next-
2017.
Well, then there needs to be an understanding that we are going to come forward with an amendment.
Right,
Okay,
and that's
up
fine,
front.
as long as there's a good reason to do it.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Counselor Baker?
Thank you, Mayor. I've talked with Mr. Bleakly and Mr. Bergen in Midtown, and they were a great help to me, and I appreciate all the time, the conversations we had. But if it's agreeable to council, just on the East TAD, I would like a delay if we're looking for action tonight, just to take a little, and that's my fault, just trying to catch up and study these a little further. I'd like a little extra time to study the East TAD a little bit. It encroaches up into the cross-country area of my district some, and I just had a few questions and a little more research I would like to do. So if there's no objection no objections from council, I would like to just delay the East TAD just for a little more research time. And yeah, and I didn't know if we were calling an action tonight or.
They're on the city manager's agenda, so if you want to delay one, you need to
Okay, yeah,
make a
then
motion.
I'll put a motion in to delay if the council is in agreement. Thank you.
Okay, it's a motion, excuse me, that's a motion, a second, to delay the East Midtown TAD, is that correct, Counselor Baker?
Midtown, it's called Midtown East TAD on my map, ma'am.
East TAD, okay. Any discussion, number 6, is there any discussion related to this request? Seeing none, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that is delayed.
All right, that'll be brought back on the city manager's agenda at the next meeting. Yeah, would y'all like to call up the West Midtown TAD?
Yes.
Well, I want to make sure that we've closed out the public hearing before we,
Yeah.
Good.
Anybody else want to comment? Midtown, east or west? Come on up, Mr. Etheridge.